everyone. This is Paul Casey, the Kenpo Karate Hall of Fame educational video series, where we talk about Kenpo. We talk about principles, motion, concepts. Sometimes we talk about the basics. We'll talk about self-defense techniques. Other times we'll probably do something with special guests. And I'm really honored this year to be talking to the 2022 Kenpo Karate Hall of Fame inductees. And we're excited today because we're going to have Master of the Arts, Graham Lelliot, with me. And Graham's going to talk about how he got into Kenpo and his life on this journey that he's been here. So with no further ado, I'm going to introduce you. Sir, how are you, Graham?
I'm doing just fine, Paul. Finally, good to meet you, my friend.
And it's okay to call you Graham, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay, in the martial arts a long time, and you've had a wonderful journey, and it continues on, and you have visions. But why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got into Kenpo?
Okay, yeah. Well, I got into Kenpo back on the island of Jersey, where I was born. In 1973, I'd just finished as a roadie with a show band tour in England, and some of the group came back to do a gig in Jersey with me. And they wanted to do karate, so I knew a place to go because my brother used to train at the Kenpo, and we all started together. That was back in late '73. So that was with the Irish under Maurice Mahoon at the time. My instructor then was a brown belt called Don Cassidy. So in the early days, that was when we started around in Jersey, and then later on we became. I think it was probably about 76, we got in touch with Rainer Schulte. And obviously the Kenpo was a lot different to what we were doing. I'm not really sure what they were doing in Ireland, but I think it was more of the Tracy system. Then when I met Rainer, it was, you look at that and you go, well, so that's what it's supposed to look like. So that was kind of a no nonsense thing for me. It was just absolutely got to change, and went on from there. So Rainer became my first instructor under Ed Parker.
Did you came up, I guess, in the blood and guts era?
Absolutely, yeah. When we done tournaments, there was no, we didn't even put a mouth shield in. It was just knuckles.
Wow. Can you remember the first day you walked into the school?
Not really. Well, I know it was a little school and it had lino on the floor, so it was very slippy. And I remember him saying, get into this horse stance, which was kind of alien to most of us. And we were in it for so long. I mean, I'll never never go out of my memory. We were in it for so long. When they finally said, take a fighting stance, my leg wouldn't stop shaking. And it was like the same along the line, my muscles were just shot, because we'd spent probably about 20 minutes in this horse stance, really low, just doing basic blocks. And they said, take a fighting stance. My back leg was literally doing this. So that was, and then it was on lino. So when you kicked in those days, if you were sweating, you'd see people falling over all the time. So you're just like skidding all over the place, but it was fun times.
When you were there, you said you had your instructor. The first instructor you had was a brown belt. Was this a gentleman that trained with Mr. McSweeney or with Mr. Conway, or?
No, he trained with Maurice Mahoon from Ireland.
Okay. And what was his influence, or who was his teacher?
I'm not sure with Maurice. I think it was Conway, I believe.
Okay. Did you ever train with any of those other instructors from Ireland?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there was people like Barney Coleman, who's well known around the Kenpo world. Shea Pageant. There was a guy called Mick Travis in the old days that was around. So I trained with those, but we didn't see him that often because living on an island, typically we had to bring people in. So you'd mainly see Maurice, but Dom was the one that was around us most of the time then. What
were the best lessons that you received or inspired you from these teachers?
In them days, because I was when I first started, I was about 25, I think it was. So I didn't really enjoy forms and that much. They were kind of wide. They were different forms than what we do now. But I did like the fighting, because at the time I was working on the doors in Jersey as well, in the pubs and the nightclubs. So but when we done the fighting in them days, we didn't have a lot of movement like you do now. We basically went toe to toe and just started punching and kicking. But it was, when you're a youngster, it's a lot of fun. So bare knuckles, you take a few whacks. But I think that was probably the part that I've always enjoyed the most was to freestyle. Did
you find that your Kenpo came in handy working in those jobs?
Yeah, a lot of times it just, it's street fighting, and that's what I try to tell a lot of my students. It's a whole different ball game when somebody's coming at you and they don't know anything about karate, because they're just going to want to hurt you. So there's no rules or anything. But there was a few times that maybe a technique like grip and talon would, not grip and talon, grasp of death, that type of thing would come in. People would try to get you in headlocks and whatever, and vice versa. We would put a lot of people out of the doors by headlocks. So, I think I had fighting in my system anyway from my dad. My dad was an 18-year Army veteran as a PE instructor, and he always had my brother and myself with boxing gloves and things. So it didn't really become an alien thing to me. I was always quite comfortable mixing it with people.
With your lessons with Master Schulte, I question is that what did he bring to your knowledge of Kenpo?
The circles were really much smaller. He would constantly be saying to me, "Get your elbows in, Graham, get your elbows in." But it was just the dynamics of the guy, I mean, the stuff we were doing so wide. It's not to say it wouldn't work, because you can make anything work if that's the only thing you have, if that's the only tools in your box. But I think it was when I saw Rainer first doing the stuff, it just looked dynamic. Everything was compact and everything just worked. You thought straight away, well, I want some of that. So I think that was the biggest influence on me, was just because he's not a big man. I mean, I'm sure you've met Mr. Schulte. He's a little muscle man, but he's not big in stature. But he could certainly make a technique work.
When you were coming over, and I'm guessing did you ever go to the internationals or compete in tournaments like that?
Yeah, I competed at the 30th internationals. I knew Lee already then, Lee Wedlake. So we were actually in the same division. It was a funny story on that, actually, because in them old days, I used to put like lollipop sticks with the numbers on, and you're in the back. And I think it was Diane Tanaka was handing them out. And I thought, don't be first, don't be first. I drew number 5. And then when I went out, there was no 1, 2, 3, 4. I was the first one on the floor. And oh my, you travel all that way and you get to be number 1 on the forms, and you just, but it was a good experience,
And did you always go to the international karate championships in Long Beach?
That's the only time I went down while it was still under the IKKA. I went a couple of times when Steve Cooper was running it. But so it's not something but some of my students went. It was just at the time when I was at 25-ish, I had a brand new daughter and everything. So it wasn't very easy for me to travel with a young baby,
I see. We're talking about some of the people that you've had as instructors. When did you meet Ed Parker?
I met Mr. Parker in, I think it was 79 or 78 or 79. First time I met him, he was traveling to London, and we were in Plymouth in England, and he traveled through to do an Elvis thing up in London. So that was the very first time I met him. When I tested under him, it was in 1980. And that's when I knew him. From then on, he became, I was still under Rainer Schulte for the first three degrees, but I always tested in front of Mr. Parker. And then when I took my 4th degree, there was 3 of us from Europe. There was Gary Ellis from England, Christian Springer from Germany, and myself that Mr. Parker took on as personal students when we tested for 4th. So that was kind of nice to become a number 1 lineage with him, so it was good.
Yeah, it is a very special thing. Can you describe your first experience with Ed Parker?
He's one of those guys that I've always tried to follow his way of doing things. He never ever made me feel awkward. I've met many instructors on the floor where they get the smarts, and they like to prove that they're very smart, so they'll ask you a question, then leave you hanging. And I've never done that with people, because if you see somebody uncomfortable, it's not fair to leave them hanging. It doesn't mean that they're stupid. They just don't have an answer for you. A lot of times, Mr. Parker would ask you a question that was double-sided anyway. He would ask you something, and if you gave him the answer, he'd probably want maybe that answer, but maybe if he'd heard that before, maybe a different way of answering it. So but the one thing that always sticks in my mind, he never ever made you feel uncomfortable on the floor.
Yeah, he was genuine. The first time I met him, he came up to me and treated me as if he'd known me for a long time.
Yeah.
And the beauty of Ed Parker is that some people don't realize that he also learned a lot from us. He was always
absolutely.
asking us a question,
Yeah,
a very Socratic method,
yeah,
and see how you thought. And sadly, most people were really intimidated by him. So he tried to coax you a little bit to get you to talk to him. And then he'd explore ideas to see if there's a different point of view that he hadn't thought of, which was rare. But he'd throw that, especially if you were at a seminar with him. Did you ever attend any of his personal seminars?
oh, absolutely. And had private lessons with him as well with,
Let's stay with the seminars first.
yeah, we had plenty in Jersey that we had in Jersey and in England, in Plymouth. We used to bounce between the two. So typically if he traveled over, if he was in Plymouth first, we would get on a plane and go and do that, then travel back with him into Jersey and do the ones there. So yeah, we got in as many as we could, you know.
Anything that stand out? Any particular seminars that he had on a Kenpo principle or concept that he wanted to explore?
Standout. I mean, he was just so good at everything, really. Standout points. I mean, I used to enjoy like the family grouping things. They used to, you get into stuff like that, and then your mind would stop. Where does that come to? Or grafting. I've always been nice. I've always liked grafting techniques, so that was a big help to me to be able to do that. Yeah, I think it's standing out. I mean, there's probably lots of things, but at the top of my head, you're probably stuck on it, you know.
I can relate to that. And many times he'd bring that up. He'd actually have an interesting discussion with the black belts there, and everybody sort of postured himself to be in the front until he asked questions. And then they all sort of go to the back.
Yeah, and I find that the same as when I'm traveling around now. It's the same sort of thing. But I mean, I was never uncomfortable asking questions with him. And I was never uncomfortable speaking with him. I mean, if we went out for dinner, quite often he would say, come and sit opposite me, Graham, because we'd throw jokes back at each other. And he was, as you know, he was a great joke teller. So he would like to get them back. So it was kind of easy to break the ice with him, you know?
Absolutely. Breaking bread with Mr. Parker was actually your greatest learning experience.
Yeah, yeah.
But for those that don't know that, they will not know that. But the wonderful thing is people like yourself and Lee Wedlake and the others that had that opportunity can share those stories. And that's important. So you're now training with Ed Parker. What was it like to train with Mr. Parker? I'm going to guess your first lesson with Ed Parker person on a private.
Yeah, I mean, well, at first it's a little bit intimidating because you think you don't want to make a mistake, and it's like everybody else, you don't want to open your mouth in case you say the wrong thing. But as I say, once you get to know him or get to know him, it was very easy to do that with him. But I guess the first time it was like everybody else, you're kind of overawed by him, you know, and you kind of, I'm not sure what I should say here, or should I answer a question? Am I going to look stupid if it's the wrong thing? But as I say, he never made me feel uncomfortable anyway. I remember one time when we were in England and we come out of we were doing about a 3-hour seminar with him with just a few black belts. And about halfway through, I was kind of, when you get that sponge experience, when your brain is just loaded up and you can't take anymore. And I was walking down the street with him and I said, about halfway through the seminar, you lost me because I just was full up. And he was, I'll never forget this, and I tell this story to a lot of people when I travel around. He put his arm around me and he looked over his shoulder and he went, let me tell you something, Graham, slow to learn, slow to forget. So a lot of people that were nodding their heads in there, they'll forget the stuff by tomorrow, but you just take little pieces and it'll be there forever, you know. With Mr. Wedlake, there's quite a few things in the forms like Form 4 and Long Form 1 and things like that, that he gave me little tidbits that no other people seem to get, or very few. For example, Long Form 1, when we do the elbow strike, he was very insistent that, it's not, most people would just say it's a reverse line or reverse motion, which was not motion because it's not going back to the same place. But he always insisted with me that think of outside the box on that. And he was very big on the zone of sanctuary with that for me when you're stepping down there. So he put that concept of the circle in the square, but also the square in the circle. So, when you come back in with the elbow, you're moving inside of the force rather than the outside of it. So most people don't see things like that because I don't think he mentioned it that often, things like Long Form 4, when we done circling fans. I spoke to him one time. I said, well, we're out of position. We're going outside to get a punch. They're supposed to be circling fans. we're going to get nailed. And he went, yeah, you're right. He said, I want you to do a universal block and treat it as an uppercut and a cross punch. And it made so much more sense. So I do an uppercut and well, I do the universal block. And I showed that to Lee one time, and he goes, yeah, that kind of makes a lot of sense. Because most people would treat it as 2 uppercuts, but you know, a lot of boxers are not going to throw 2 uppercuts. They're going to throw an uppercut and a cross. And so it's things like that just makes sense. And I've always left them in my forms, even though I know they're alien to what other people are doing. I think, well, that's a special thing he showed me, so I'm sticking with it, you know.
He actually personalized it for you. What
Absolutely.
it is that you inspired him to think about that, and then instantly he recognized something that he might have seen it, but he didn't really think about it, because as we know, we're creatures of habit. We start to repeat ourselves, and that's our answer. And then we really, wait a second, there's another way to walk this path.
The memory on him as well. I remember when another seminar in England, when we were all doing Form 4, and then at the end, this would have been in 80, probably 84, maybe 85. And he said, we were doing Form 4, and at the very end, he said, because you realize there's a short 4, and we all went, what? Yeah. And he said, think about it. So I think it was a year or so later, then I kind of went home and developed it, just doing one side and the opposite side. And I had one of my black belts who was testing for a black. And I said, I want you to do this for your thesis for me in front of Mr. Parker. And shows the memory on him, Paul, because when he's seen him do it, his name was Trevor Fall. And he didn't really acknowledge Trevor, although he said it in nice form. He come up and he tapped me on the shoulder and he said, I knew you'd do that. And this was about 18 months later, you know, and he'd only said it off the cuff, but he just, that's the memory of the man was incredible, you know.
I don't think he forgot anything.
Yeah.
Though we wish he did sometimes.
Right.
I'll leave it at that with the humors. He like you said, his sense of humor was great. What was it like training with Lee Wedlick? Lee,
I met, I think it probably would have been about 86, something like that. I know it was a 3rd degree when I met Lee. He came over to Jersey with Dennis Kanatsa and Skip Hancock when I first met him. But from the day I met Lee, I always liked him. I always thought of him more of a friend than anything else. He was just, we got on very, very quickly, the two of us, and it's been a kind of a very special friendship all the way since then. I lost contact a little while with him, and then when I went to the 30th Internationals, I made contact again, and that's when we started getting him back into Jersey. But he's just been, when I talk about Lee, I don't really talk about him as instructor. I talk about him more as a teacher and a friend. You know, it's because you just have a wealth of knowledge that's inspiring to me sometimes. You've met him. It's just, yes, some good stuff.
You know, I've known Lee since 1978. I met Frank Trejo and Ed Parker at the Trejo tournament at, it was the 4th IKKA. And it was in November. It was cold in Southern California, which means you had to wear a jacket. Okay, that's not cold to most people. And I was in the Pasadena school, and I remember when Lee came in, and I was training with Frank. And ever since then, I've had a very good relationship with Lee Wedlick. I call him privately, I'll call him Lee, but publicly, you know, he's a senior master of the arts, and he's so well deserved of that rank, because
absolutely,
he, like you, had the great privilege of training directly with Ed Parker and to speak on behalf of what he thought about it. And that's a rare thing. So Lee was there when he signed off on my first brown, and I think my second. I know he did my first brown, and then he was on my board when I tested. Great guy, and I've had him numerous times on this program.
And I think the thing that took me with him most, I think, when I first meeting with him, that he was the quiet one of the 3, you know, and he was just so easy to get on with, and he was unassuming, not brash about anything, but you could just see that there was a wealth of knowledge there, you know.
Sure. The other 2 you said, with Dennis Kanatsa and Skip Hancock, is that what you said?
They were on that same trip, so you know, they're good friends, especially Dennis. I mean, everybody likes Dennis.
Sure, Dennis is your fun guy. He really is. He's got a good personality. He does really care about sharing the knowledge, and he is fierce about his loyalty to Ed Parker. There is no question there. I mean, he really does believe in it, and I've had numerous conversations with him as well. We're getting toward the end of our conversation here. Is there anything that stands out as a real personal or memorable moment for you in your Kenpo journey?
Well, I'd say one of the moments was with Mr. Parker when he put his arm around me, obviously, and said, you know, it was like a personal thing, slow to learn, slow to forget. But I think is the encouragement I got from Rainer Schulte and Mr. Parker to do my first seminar in Madrid on my own. So that's the first time I'd done an international seminar, and that would have been back in 1986, something like that. So that was a huge thing for me, because I started bringing the Spanish together, you know, and they were from all different parts of Spain. They were very fragmented all over the place, and it was very, very good for me to bring them together. And I've made so many friends over there that have stayed lifelong friends with me, you know, from Spain. So that was probably one of the biggest moments, and to just be set out on the international career to go and teach. I mean, since then I teach a lot of places like Australia, New Zealand, South America. But I think the most special place for me was Spain in the old days, because it was my first time out as a black belt teaching, you know.
Everybody's very excited. They'll be meeting you in Las Vegas for the 2022 Kenpo Karate Hall of Fame Awards ceremony. What is your vision, Graham? What is your vision for Kenpo? What do you see in the near future, a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, Kenpo's place?
Yeah, well, on a personal level, as I say, I have a lot of students on my lineage that are out back in Jersey, obviously, and in Australia and New Zealand. And I hope that when I'm not teaching anymore, I'm not around anymore, that I've left them enough answers. Well, there'll never be enough questions or answers, I guess. But the one thing that I miss out of Mr. Parker, that I don't think I had enough wealth of knowledge to ask the right questions when he was alive. And I'm sure that's true of all of us. You know, we think about things later on and we go, I wish I'd have asked him this, I wish I'd asked him that. So I really encourage my people to ask as many questions as they can and get as much knowledge as they can. So I think if I can leave it where they're in a better position than I am, my goal is always to make a better black belt than I am. And I think if you can achieve that, then you've done your job. As far as children, I think just to get them functioning as something, especially today's kids with the COVID and everything like that. It's such a bad world at the moment, and you see the kids that are going back into their shells. They use their mask as a security blanket. So I'm just hoping and praying that we can get past that as a short-term vision and get the world back to where it was, basically, you know.
That was the whole purpose of why I went into the martial arts, you know, is to overcome fear and build self-confidence and character. And I learned that from my teachers and more importantly now from my students and my little boy. I really want to be a guide for him. He's only 6.5 and he's competing in tournaments. And it is really exciting to watch young martial artists compete. And the passion and excitement, and they're inspired by people like yourself. You have done so much good for Kenpo, and you continue to do that with your teaching through your students and such. Master Graham Lelliot, I want to say congratulations to you on behalf of the entire Kenpo Karate Hall of Fame members. There's a lot of them there, and they're going to be excited to see you. And when this video gets out, I know that you will have a whole new base and people will be reaching out to you. Sir, on behalf of all of us here, thank you so much and congratulations.
Well, thank you, Paul. And on a personal note, I'll be looking forward to seeing you in one-to-one. And I want to congratulate you on everything that you do. I mean, I do follow you on Facebook at times, and I see the posts that you do. And you're doing a fantastic job for the art as well. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much.